Welcome to Channel Amic, your insight to the Australian visa system. G'day everyone, my name's Carl Young, your online YouTube visa consultant. Are you interested about migrate to Australia? Why don't you consider to subscribe to our channel and turn on a little bell on the side, so once we have the updates and news, you'll be the first one of getting all the insights. Now yesterday, obviously a lot of people might already notice there has been a cabinet meeting that's between the Prime Minister and all the premiers of all the different states and territories around Australia had met together in Canberra. And afterwards, obviously, the Prime Minister Scott Morrison had brief to the media for about an hour. It was a long brief in regards to how, as a nation of Australia, to actually have an exit plan out of this pandemic. Now, it's actually very important. I took a very deep study and listened to what the Prime Minister had said. Obviously, the reason I'm reporting this is this would definitely affect you if you want to migrate to Australia, or perhaps you're a migrant of Australia, whereby you frequently travel in and out of Australia. Now, the very simple first thing to know that the international travel has been halved. That means there's going to be less international travel in and out of Australia, so that would definitely affect you. And a lot of people, a lot of friends and fans, viewers, query and leave a comment every day now asking whether or not Australia is going to open up for their offshore skill migration. So unfortunately, because of this international, the new restrictions, I do not think the offshore skill migration will actually be opened up sooner before I think once we reach to phase 2 of the actual plan. So let's looking into the actual detail of this the strategic plan to actually end the lockdown and end the pandemic, how the Australian government as a nation had agreed all together how to actually work this out. So let's jump into it. Now, detail, you may want to search the actual media release from what the Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister, had actually said. It's quite lengthy, but this video will actually provide you a summary of what it is. So I'm taking on this is the Guardian news. It basically report and gives you a summary here, and I will leave my also adding into my comment and how this will work. So Scott Morrison has announced a full phase pathway out of COVID. So what's in Australian pandemic exit plan? So it's going to be 4 phases. So that's 1 or 2, 3, but there are 4 phases. We need to know every single phase because every single phase has its detailed plan to actually open up internationally. So obviously that will affect migrants and that will affect the travel restriction internationally. When will life go back to normal? When can Australians go overseas? And also there are so many stranded overseas Australians, that's including myself, who have actually received messages from, I think, numerous different media groups. Well, they basically want to hear how the Australians overseas feel about this. Obviously not happy. When I see the media on Facebook, there's a lot of thumbs down and angry faces because obviously it's restricting your freedom of traveling and also restricting the opportunity for offshore skilled migrants as well. So how soon the lockdown became a thing of the past, and here's what we know about so far about the government's 4-point plan. So let's read on, and so I think that the mask that Scott Morrison wears is quite fashionable. Anyway, okay, that's just my little comment. So Prime Minister Scott Morrison had outlined 4-phase plan for a pathway out of pandemic, and which include end of lockdowns, obviously. And the one thing that the Prime Minister had mentioned is that lockdown should be utilized as the last resort. So basically the Commonwealth government of Australia does not wish that the state to actually utilize lockdown for for the recent Delta cases where Victoria, New South Wales, and Queensland, and also Western Australia had chosen to implement lockdown for only a few days, but that also caused a lot of issue there. So the Commonwealth government doesn't want that to be happening. So I think that's how South Australia had actually follow through, although before the announcement of 4 phases, but South Australian government had always been with the current government. South Australia has always been following quite closely of what Canberra want them to do. Okay, and there's more. So no more domestic restriction of vaccinate Australians and unlimited arrival caps on vaccinated travelers. So being vaccinated will be the big topics for the upcoming 3 to 6 months. So we will see that in the rest of 2021, where we have already gone through for the half of this year. So the second half of the year we'll see more and more about vaccination, manufacturing vaccines. More producers will come out. Obviously the world wants to end this. I think from the last news of G7 was by end of 2022, but for a modern countries like Australia, obviously do not want to wait until next year. So we want to get that done as soon as possible. So on Friday, that's yesterday, Morrison announced the federal government and the states and territories had all agreed to this 4-phase plan. The final stages were announced at the press conference on Friday, which more detail provided later. Obviously, the details are already there. It's Saturday's weekend here. No data has been set on various phases, with Morrison saying that they depend on vaccination target, and he's specifically saying that the numbers required cannot be politically debated, should come from scientific backed information, and that should be measured as how the virus is going through, because viruses that does change. It came from the very original one and became alpha and became now delta and delta plus. I don't know how that would go, but that's the plan. And by the end of the 3rd phase, Prime Minister said that COVID-19 will be treated just like a flu. I think that will coincide with what Singapore had announced a couple of days ago. Now, obviously, we want that to be flu because we don't want that to be as deadly as what it's actually at the moment. Any other infectious disease, and then phase 4 will be completely back to normal. Okay, I mean, treated like flu will be almost like back to normal. But anyway, let's see what the differences they are. Okay, so phase 1. Okay. Morrison said stage 1 will be known as a vaccinate, prepare, and pilot. So basically, they want the mass majority of the Australian population to all get vaccinated. So obviously, there are so many different brands of vaccines. You probably can choose. If you're not in Australia, make sure you choose the right one, okay? Because obviously, it has caused a lot of concerns of the blood clots and causing a lot of elderly eventually die. So just choose carefully and study the things carefully. Under stage 1, international arrival cap was reduced by 50%. So that's the major thing. So that's why I'm saying for predominantly most of the migrants wishing for offshore skill migrations, that won't happen until phase 1 is done. Okay, to cope with increased transmissibility of the Delta variant and reduce the pressure of the hotel quarantine system. Now, you notice that although Australia has been overall done pretty well in coping with the virus, but its hotel quarantine system has always been a breach point. Don't know why. They should have done it better, but anyhow, I think it's due to the pressure. I'm not too sure, But with the numbers of what Australia had encountered compared to a lot of other countries, that shouldn't be an excuse. But anyhow, I think that will leave it to the medical team profession to actually comment on this. But anyhow, let's read on. It is expected the reduction will be in place until at least the end of the year. So that means that giving a little bit of glimpse of the time frame that we are looking to get all vaccinated by the end of the year. Now that was the plan for last year, but they didn't get it done. I don't know why. If somebody had been following the vaccination program in Australia, might want to comment right below what's happening. And I recall back in 2020, I thought Australia was the first and piloted country where it's developing its own vaccine. I remember and recall strongly it was University of Queensland who was the first one had developed the vaccination. But where are the Australian made vaccines? Don't know what's happening. Anyway, if you have been following that, why don't you leave a comment right down below, tell us what's happening out there. I don't know. Anyway, at the same time, some states will trial a system where return vaccinated travelers. Now, this is very important. So if you're an international traveler, if you're overseas, make sure you get vaccinated. But because there's so many brands and different type of vaccinations out there, whether as the government of Australia will recognize the brand of your vaccine that you have been vaccinated to be able for you to return to Australia as a traveler. That's question mark, so we don't know. We don't know yet. Probably more information will be announced later on. And we'll be quarantining at home, so you don't need to go to quarantine hotel anymore. Only seven days. That's not too bad. Rather than 14 days in hotel. On Friday, Morrison said South Australia had indicated that it will be willing to be part of a trial. So I think South Australia has been taking a very proactive courses. This current government of South Australia has been taking very proactively in regards to international travelers and migration plans. You can see it's been very innovative, and I think it's the state that the government of Australia wanted to promote as well, because they don't want too many people to go to obviously New South Wales and Victoria. So they want to push not just Queensland is okay, but not Brisbane. They want them to go Gold Coast or Sunshine Coast or northern part or central Queensland. Anyhow, so that's phase 1. Now let's jump into phase 2. Okay, so phase 2, you should see here. Oops. Okay, under phase 2, okay, the international arrival cap will be restored to previous level. Now that means the international arrival will be at the same rate of what we have last week. Now that's still not enough, because as you know, Australia had been called Fortress Australia because a lot of stranded Australians and international students cannot at the moment all of them to be traveling into Australia. But of course, they are opening up with the pilot program, pilot plan by the state government of New South Wales and also South Australia. I assume that the Queensland and Victoria will open that up very soon. And at the moment, from the information that I gathered, mostly the international students who have been invited into the pilot program or pilot plan are those who study medical or health related subjects or courses. So unfortunately, if you have picked cookery or accounting, carpentry, things like this kind of courses, unfortunately you are still in the wait list. You're not there for the pilot program. Now under the second phase, Morrison said that lockdown will only occur in extreme circumstances. Okay, so that he's specifically saying that it should be a last resort, not to be utilized, because if you follow the news, you have been seeing state government of Australia has been utilizing lockdown to prevent their states of being infected. But then it became an issue of, for example, goods and services and business travelers between different states. Okay, so they don't want that to be happening. Vaccinated residents will also have the ease restriction under any lockdown or similar rule. So anyway, if there's a lockdown happening, for example, what's happening in New South Wales, if you're vaccinated, you'll still be able to travel. On Friday, Morrison said that it will possibly be a phase 2 in 2022. So looks like the second half of 2021 will focus solely with phase 1, with mass vaccinations for the population of Australia, because he planned a phase 2 should be in 2022. Well, that pays basically for offshore skilled migrant. Sorry, we were estimated that this will be happening in the second half of 2021, but things had always been changing in this year. In these 2 years, nothing had gone through with the plan. It's hard to give a definitive answer because we haven't set of what vaccinated target is. He said, I hope we will be going to second phase next year. So that will come into with a scientific study and data. For example, they're looking at how Singapore, Israel, and USA had done with currently how many percentage of vaccinated populations, and how that had decreased the number of infected patients, or perhaps the death rates. So at the moment, I think majority of the countries is watching how UK is doing, because currently there's Delta variant in UK. Although there has been still a spike of infectious number of people, but the death rate had dropped dramatically. Whether or not that will trigger a better solution, that will leave it to all the health and science medical professions to actually gather with a report. So, however, he said that the meant that phase 1, with its half arrival cap, will be in place until at least start of 2020. So that follows it. So basically, from now until the 2022. I think Australia as a nation will focus solely on getting the population vaccinated. Now, phase 3. Okay. Oops, what's happening? Why did that all the time? Okay, anyway. Okay, the third phase will treat the COVID like the other infectious disease, Morrison says. So, they'll treat it just like a flu. So, once most of the population being vaccinated, then they move into phase 2, where they start to getting to the flow and test it out. So between phase 2 and phase 3, I think the timing and the term will be shorter. At this point in time, obviously the vaccine required to be double jabs. As you know, you need to take 2 vaccinations in a period to actually get that your protection there. So I presume the phase 2, moving from phase 2 to phase 3, the timing will be shorter. So the phase 1 will be about half a year. Okay, from now on until end of the 2021, and phase 3, I would say probably from what we are looking at, obviously depends on how the medical and health professions propose and advises. Then phase 3 will hit that. Then basically the government will treat the virus just like a normal infectious disease. Under phase 3, there will be no lockdowns, no caps returning vaccinated travelers. So if you're vaccinated overseas, well, obviously with the vaccine brand that is recognized by Australian government, okay, you can travel in and out of Australia, no caps, no problem, okay, and no domestic restriction on vaccinated residents, and there could be a travel bubble with countries like Singapore. Now, I will presume there will be more countries, because at that time, it's funny if at that time by 2022, if majority of the modern countries hadn't been vaccinated, that would be a crisis, a major global economic crisis there. So under phase 3, we should treat it like a flu, and that means no lockdown. Morrison said that he also said that will be increasing through the caps and entry of international students, more and more international students. So I will say that will be a second half of 2022, because we're looking at the commencing semesters. For the first semester, February or March, not likely. I don't know. It could be, but what is your thought? I don't know. Anyway, final phase. Stage 4 will be returning to pre-pandemic, so that's normal. That's just like normal life. Although still with there will be pre-post flight testing people arriving in Australia. Morrison declined to set out time frame phase 4 as early as, obviously people want that to end as early as possible. So basically that's the 4 phases. Now, don't know what is your thought. Leave your comment right down below. Now I think the longest phases that we're gonna go through should be phase 1, because getting people lined up and get vaccinated and with 2 jabs will take the longest time required. And then you can see that from phase 2 to phase 3, as I had, if you read it, you will know that it's not gonna be lengthy. Now, once you hit phase 3, it's basically a time frame to test out and to prevent perhaps additional, virus variants. If not, then we'll hit phase 4 quicker, as soon as possible, obviously. So what is your thought? Unfortunately, for a lot of offshore skilled migrants, it's not a good news. As a nation of Australia, it's the priority is to save and protect its citizens and populations. So they have to choose. The only choice at the moment. I think it's a good steps. At least there's a plan there. But how that will work obviously depends on how the virus actually move around. Leave a comment right down below, and I see you next video. Have a nice weekend. Goodbye.